Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick DaCosta. I'll be facilitating this webinar today. I will hand over to John Harper in a moment, and then we will start with our presentation. Just very quickly as well, with regards to the webinar, if you do want to ask any questions, if you could pop them in writing in the chat, and then we can ask Erik and Aaron those questions, and they can give a response to those. I'll try and get through as many of the questions as possible, so we're going to try and be as efficient as possible as well. So if you're asking a question, also if you could not make it a very long essay, so we can get through it. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to our publisher, John Harper.
Thank you, Nick. I'll keep this brief because we're a few minutes late. Just a few words on the presenters today. You can get the fuller biographies of both of them on our website, about the authors in the public affairs section. Erik Akse is the editor of our book on how the EU institutions work and the author of the chapter on the commission in that book, where he did work for some years. Erik now provides advice, training and coaching on how EU decision-making and policy development works and the implementation of better regulation principles, particularly in countries that are in the process of preparing to join the European Union. Aaron McLoughlin, who's the author of the Commission chapter on the How to Work with the EU Institutions book. Aaron's a 20-year veteran of the Brussels scene, including spells working at the Commission in DG Environment, head of public affairs for the European Chemical Industry Council, head of the WWF European Marine Programme, and is now senior advisor at Fleischmann Hillard in Brussels, where his work focuses on substance regulation, environmental policy, regulatory decision-making, and fisheries. And after that rather rushed introduction, I'll hand you over to the speakers to take it away from here. Thank you.
Excellent. We'll be starting very shortly. We're going to be starting off with Erik first. I'm just going to share the presentation, and then we can get started there. Just bear with me. I control the slides. Perfect. Erik, over to you. I can't. Sorry, apologies.
Ciao.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nick. And thanks for the introduction, John, as well. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you're having your coffee and your lunch and everything ready together for this great session. I'm moving a bit back and forward because I'm on treadmill at a standing desk. I like to have some exercise during these kind of events and also doing trainings and meetings online. My name is Erik Akse. I just go through, and John already mentioned, I work on how the EU institutions work, that book. Nick, if you can go into the slides, I think that would be very much appreciated. I only have 4 slides, so not too long. First of all, the European Commission, it's a chapter that I wrote, it's always stable in a way. From one year to the other, from one commission to the other, you see that they're very stable in terms of structure and procedures. Not too many things have formally changed. Of course, you always have different people, and you can see that nicely in the faces, so to speak, of the previous commission and the current one. Different people mean different dynamics. But I think the big change this time around is that the political circumstances, or at least the interpretation of the political circumstances, has changed a lot. And not just European Parliament composition, new priorities of allies, President Trump in the White House and things like that. So working with that has been subject to a lot of interpretation, how to take that forward. I said not too much things have formally changed. So if you still take the documents, if you take the structure of the commission, if you take the better regulation approach and the guidelines and the toolbox, those are still in place. Nick, next slide, please. But, and here comes the big BUT coming in, so to speak. What I do in my work as well is that I provide strategic advice on how to actually engage in EU decision making. And that's very often trying to predict things, how they're going to operate, not just this year, but the next 3-4 years ahead. How to use impact assessment and evaluation logic, how to use evidence, and also then how to prepare, how to do data collection, how to prepare yourself, so to speak, the moment legislation is going to be adopted by the European Commission. I think in there, you see that small changes matter a lot. What I did in this slide is simply take the annex to the Commission work program for 25 and 26. And there's a small but significant change. You can probably see it on the left side each time when there is an impact assessment made. The Commission mentioned that in its work program in 2025 still. In 26, they took that out. Is that a big thing? I would say yes. Not that you cannot find this kind of information at all anymore, but it becomes a bit more difficult. For example, when I was discussing on the work plan for 26 with some of my clients, they were saying, okay, is there going to be an impact assessment? Okay, you can double check. You have different kind of websites of the EU where you can see whether an impact assessment has started or not. Have your say, of course, the key one in there. But they were asking for proposals to be adopted by the end of 2026. And then the discussion was always like, okay, are you sure that there will be an impact assessment or not? So literally, if you need to ask that to the Commission itself, they will be able to tell you, because based on the planning, even in December, if there was no process like that started, you could still finish one by, let's say, December 2026. So in that sense, you see that there's less of information provision, and that makes it a bit more difficult to navigate what's happening in Brussels itself. And is there a big difference, I think, for stakeholders? I would say yes. If there's an impact assessment, you have a very different dynamic of the process compared to files that do not have one. The way that things are going to be analyzed, the type of evidence used, the consultation approach, all those things are immediately affected if impact assessment is not present. And of course, for any kind of stakeholder involvement in the decision-making process, and Aaron will come back to that later as well, knowing which procedure will apply and the type of procedure will make quite an impact on the possibilities that there are. Next slide, please. There's another aspect that I also would like to highlight here. Again, the documents themselves have not changed fundamentally. So it's still that the Commission presents management plans, strategic plans based on the political priorities. But what is in there has actually changed quite a lot. And I took here simply as an example, strategic plan of DG taxation and customs. What was in there last time, and you see it nicely on the right side, is simply the table of contents. Don't go into it and all the individual chapters, but you can see it's like 33, including annexes, is definitely more like 50 pages of information, what is going to happen in the next 5 years. And there was a lot of information in there, like when the evaluations are going to be organized, when they're supposed to be finalized, for example. From there, you could also identify already when certain topics will be becoming a bit more live in Parliament and Council, very often before the start of an evaluation or during an evaluation. The co-legislators would become more aware and therefore also more active. There was a very high level of predictability, I think, based on this documentation. In my own experience, it's like 80–90% would be definitely done the way that it was planned. And most of the other things is not that they were kicked out, but you would see more like delays than fundamental policy shifts. I mean, in a few areas, of course, things might look suddenly very different 4 years or 5 years later. But overall, that was quite a solid system, I would say, in terms of providing people insight into what's going to happen in the next, during the Commission mandate. So that's 5 years, in this case, 2019-24. Nick, the next one. Thank you. That is now quite different because the European Commission has now published one overall strategic plan, and per individual DG, and I simply took the table of contents again of customs, taxation and customs union DG. You see in there that the strategic outlook 2025-29 has been reduced from tens of pages to like 4, which gives you a very different insight on what actually the Commission is going to do. And when you read it, it is a bit of a general blurb, so to speak. It's not that it gives you a lot of usable information what's actually going to happen. What I find particularly interesting in there is that there's nothing been changed in terms of the evaluation planning. A lot of evaluations or other means to inform co-legislators. You might have heard about legal reviews that need to happen, implementation reports, application reports that the Commission must present to the Parliament and Council after a certain time of implementation of a EU directive or regulation, or at a certain date. They might be actually saying that by, I don't know, May 28th, there needs to be a certain report submitted to the co-legislators. All that information that the Commission has, they're not presenting that straightforward anymore. It's not that the information is completely missing, so to speak, but you will need to look for it far more actively, which can have a challenge. It can be a challenge for not necessarily for the involved and really informed organizations, but still, transparency is gone to a bit. You still have the information, but I will say that at this moment, you need to find the puzzle pieces yourself and then put them together more before the European Commission would be able and would actually be doing that kind of, if I can say, service, transparency to the stakeholders and also, of course, member states and others. And in that sense, I think that the procedural dynamics on each file, even though the situation on paper has not really changed, it looks already quite different because the information that the Commission is providing is not as centralized anymore. It's not as clear and as predictable anymore. It's still out there, but it takes a bit more time to actually go through it. And I'm saying a bit more time because probably, I suppose, a lot of you are working professionally with Brussels on a regular basis, probably daily even. For you, you have your networks, you have an understanding of how things are going. You might be in direct touch with several of the DGs that you are working with. But I hear from organizations as well that are a bit further away. They're more like part-time involved in EU decision-making, that they are finding it more difficult to understand when to put their resources in there, how to prepare. And they're a bit concerned that they might be more surprised by what's going to happen, not being able to be proactive anymore in getting involved in EU decision-making. And another concern that I heard is that, of course, as an organization, you probably have 1 or 2 policy areas that are your key focus, so to speak. That's where you really are invested in. But there's a lot of things happening in Brussels, issues that might not directly be on the radar of different organizations. And there are concerns, so to speak, that there might be some loss of control over understanding what the Commission overall is doing. I think before, with the strategic plans, you get a quite good understanding of what might happen when, more or less, and then from there you could follow the files. I think the monitoring has become a bit more difficult, probably more like interactive, so to speak, on the level of Commission officials, directors, downwards as well, the people that really have the practical information, and then piecing together from different kind of documents how the procedural process will look like, and then from there, of course, what kind of actions can be taken to actually be involved. That was it from my side. We saw some questions, but first back to Aaron. And then from there, we will take on the questions together with Nick.
Perfect.
Nick, can you yes, perfect.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Erik. And over to you, Aaron. Thank you very much.
So I only have 3 slides. I look at this from a very sort of practical practitioner's viewpoint. And I apologize whilst some days I feel like the chapters need to be updated in a sort of Maoist-like purge every few weeks to reflect practice, but I can't. So this is going to mirror a lot of what Erik said. We look at it from a different perspective. The chapters complement each other. They're not the same. So you have to buy both books. So just practically, so the rule book, the working methods, which I recommend reading, isn't profoundly different from previous editions of Commission working methods. You'll see small tweaks. Inter-service consultation is removed from 15 days to 10 days as a working rule. Whilst in practice, it's 48 hours. One recent public inter-service consultation was 48 hours in a closed room, which is possible for sensitive files. Unfortunately, the DG locked the room so no one could see the file. So it's rather hard for other services to give input. And if you look at the recent ombudsman's inquiries, and speaking to people who worked on, have a good idea of what was happening on those files, it's a reflection of reality. So if you want to understand how decisions are actually being made, I would recommend using the the working methods as a sort of reference book, and then seeing reality in the ombudsman's reports. Next slide, please. So I see, and this is a sort of growing trend from Martin Selmayr, a politicization of the Commission, to a growing sort of centralization of power and decision making in an inner circle of the president and some of her key advisors. There's an outer circle of key officials, some commissioners who have the president's ear. And then the green is cabinets and commissioners. Some commissioners are listened to, others maybe less so. I would say growing a marked trend under this commission, and it was already there in the last commission, is cabinet officials seem to believe they're technical experts and start drafting proposals, usually on a Sunday evening on legislative text for something they probably didn't know 48 hours before. So that's a sort of growing trend. I'm not saying it's good or bad. And on the outer edge is the civil service. And when I started in sunny Brussels in 1996, the Commission, I think, was a very such strong technocracy, slightly weakened by Sonder, but that was overcome by Barroso and Catherine Day. One of the challenges I see this dynamic leads to, you call up the desk officer or the head of unit dealing with the file, you're asking them how progress is on the file, and they'll go, I have no idea. So they are instructed, usually quite late in the day, on what to do, sometimes by cabinets, sometimes by commissioners, and sometimes by the president's inner circle, which means that historical approach to sort of technocratic decision making, which I will admit I'm quite nostalgic to, is less and less. Next slide, please. Well, I'm going to be recorded, so I'll try to be honest, but my Catholic guilt will get in the way. So I'm going to be honest. I don't think I would say better regulation. I was trying to watermark it with rest in peace ? I think it's, so if you look at why better regulation guidelines were created, it was post-Santerre Commission. It was to bring structure and some degree of rationale of good governance into the Commission. And I've spoken to many officials where it's like sort of talking about a fantasy novel. There's very little awareness of of the rules, of the principles. If you talk about cost-benefit analysis, it's like talking about a forbidden, dirty word or something. And I was much amused about the ongoing public consultation on simplifying it. Yes, and perhaps it will return like a phoenix from the ashes, but maybe in a few years' time. So the rules are still structurally there. It's still in the Commission's working methods. Whether it's practiced is maybe depends on which DG. So I think that's the end of my, because you wanted me to be brief. You're silent.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, that's the end of the presentation element. Huge thank you to both of you for that. Apologies for not unmuting myself at the end. We first ran this series 6 years ago, where we did the webinars, and was it 6 years ago?
Yeah, 5 years ago.
Yeah, 5-6 years ago, and we still have the same issue of forgetting to unmute ourselves on Teams or Zoom. So thank you very much for that, Aaron and Eric. If those online have any questions, please pop them in the chat, and I'll read out the questions. I think we've got quite a nice one to start from Kees Mulder, which is, how can the Commission be flexible in today's dynamic world? Now, that came in, I think Aaron's just finished his bit, so we're going to give him a rest, and we'll go to Eric first, and then if Aaron wants to interject as well. Eric, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Perfect. It worked. Yes, it's a very nice one. I think the Commission can already be quite dynamic in its decision making. If you simply look at developing laws, proposals, directives, regulations, even under the current system, there is no blockage, so to speak, to move very fast. If you really must, and that is also recognized very clearly in the better regulation approach of the European Commission, you can skip impact assessment, you can skip consultation, because you have a real urgency. I find this discussion, honestly, about what Aaron also presented on the of evidence regarding better regulation approach, I found it a bit strange to say, like, oh, we have a different world. We need to have more faster decision making. There are already ways to say we do an impact assessment, a small impact assessment after we adopted legislation. I actually was involved in an impact assessment like that for the Ukraine facility. Some years ago, the war had started in Ukraine. Everybody understands you're not going to spend 1.5 years on consultation and impact assessment before you adopt that proposal. And if there is a massive trade imbalance because the Americans, the President Trump is imposing massive tariffs, everybody will understand that you will want to move fast. And there's no blockage to that. So I think they can already be quite dynamic. What I also find in there is that if you really want to be dynamic in terms of your legislation, you need to not look at directives and regulations necessarily. You need to look at the level of delegated and implementing acts. That's where you can change things really fast. And there's a bit of a conflict in thinking, I would say, because on one hand, people say we need to have more of the legislative requirements into the primary law. So in the directive and the regulation, we need to move away from delegated and implementing acts. But if you want to be dynamic, because the lawmaking process simply takes far more time than adopting and amending delegated implementing acts. If you want to be dynamic, you need to move more to the level of these delegated implementing acts. Aaron, was it long enough a break for you to?
That's a fact, super.
Add something.
If you look at the changes the Commission have tabled, I believe they are, I'll take a low number, 90% are for pieces of legislation they implemented under the last Commission. And if only we could speak to the people who were in charge under the last Commission, why they passed pieces of legislation which this Commission need to change. One of the concerns raised by many officials, the rush to push through proposals at breakneck speed under the last Commission, were we haven't thought these through. And I think there are very few things in life which should be done incredibly fast, and lawmaking and policy making isn't one of them. It requires experience, it requires fullness, and it requires evidence. And I have a suspicion if we continue just to push through often slightly cosmetic changes via the omnibus package, we'll be relooking at this issue. And then there's structural changes like energy prices being very high in Europe, which I believe has been with Europe since 1953. We, in fact, created a treaty, the European Coal and Steel Treaty, just to deal with that issue. So I think there are structural issues which heads of state have known for many years. And I would always ask the Commission if they felt particularly brave and courageous and European, would perhaps to have some fun with the member states who don't just gold plate their regulations, but platinum plate them. Not just in fact gold or platinum plated fax machines, I hear, must exist in certain countries. So I think there's some structural issues which don't really seem to be about the EU rules. When I was speaking to a Belgian businessman, understanding the horrors of the bureaucracy he has to face. I'm doing a small project in Italy, which would put anyone off ever doing any business at all. And that's dealing with a corporation. So perhaps some benchmarking by the Commission of EU rules, national rules, local rules, and corporate rules.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Come next to a question from Laura Rayner, which I think is quite an interesting one. I probably think it will be quite useful to people on this call, which is, how is the best way to find the right policy officer these days? The who's who used to be detailed, but now we can only usually find the head of unit or above. Aaron, I'll come to you first on this one.
So as the person who brought a complaint to the Ombudsman on that, to find out the slightly fictitious threats issued against officials and the reason for that decision. So in practice, emailing the head of unit usually gets you sent down to the desk officer pretty quickly. So it has, I think practically that can be solved. I think there is unfortunately no old edition of the who's who lying around. Someone could have made a fortune if they had PDF'd it. And I think, and then it's sort of relying on a political network or a network of people. And then I think something which I've discovered, in particular younger people, and I'm not young, find it very difficult, is just picking up the phone and calling up, calling up the head of unit's assistant and just going, could I speak to the official dealing with this area? And that usually works. Or you could be doing lobbying for 30 years in Brussels and then you probably know them anyway. So that's practical.
Excellent. There's some really practical steps there. Erik, anything you want to add to that?
Just some old-fashioned legwork. Have a meeting, see who's around the table, so to speak, if you're not getting that information straightforward from the email. Because the head of unit might also say to their policy officials, prepare the draft for me and the respondent I will send. And of course, if you see the commission at any kind of event or meeting in the parliament, the right responsible people, not just head of unit, but also policy officials will be there. So just adding to Aaron's perfect ideas. Yes, first send the email, and probably it will be delegated down or somebody will be in CC. And if that doesn't work, ordinary legwork, going to meetings, and asking for meetings yourself.
I suppose if I add to that, the key is maintaining and managing your network, and doing that networking is really important. In multiple organizations, you see people hiding behind gatekeepers, and so it's important that you maintain those networks. As Aaron said, pick up the phone and talk to people, because sometimes you get through very strict gatekeepers just by making that first call. I'll come to the next question, which is, could you elaborate on the political versus technocratical approaches in the Commission? In the one hand, I do understand what you say about increasing the concentration of power, and I think, Aaron, you covered that. But in the other, I also have the impression that the DGs still have a lot of power as they are in constant touch with stakeholders and know which EU legal should be tweaked or not. Is that your impression, or is the person asking is the person who's asked the question incorrect?
The person asking the question is, I think, is quite a well-connected journalist. So I think it depends on the file. So on politically sensitive files, there is a far greater centralization of power. I spend a lot of my time on technical legislation, secondary legislation, and it is, I don't believe many political staff are that interested in these technical rules. But what has struck me under this commission, and it started with Martin Selmayr, so it's a continuance. Even seemingly small and technical files can be made political, and things change. And so the journalist will know of many a case, say, for example, deforestation, where I don't believe the DG even knew the proposal was coming out the door until the morning it was sent to them.
And Erik, your thoughts?
Well, there's always a very strong technocratic part that the commission will need to do. So the DGs down from the director general downwards. I mean, all the work on evaluations and things like that. But it's not something that you can simply take away, or that will suddenly pass to somebody else. I mean, they're themselves responsible. The interference comes in, the question comes in indeed, where you go from an idea to an actual proposal. And I would say the more you centralize, the more missteps you will have. I fully agree, Aaron, when you said you shouldn't rush decision-making for laws and policies. And you might rush a bit more on the level of a country. But the feedback loop in Brussels, the moment you adopt wrong legislation, so to speak, and you want to amend it, either you need to wait another 5 to 10 years, or you're going to have the situation that you see now in several files. We adopted something yesterday, and tomorrow we want to change it again. That doesn't really instill a lot of confidence in the way that you have been doing your work before. And let's keep in mind that it's the same political leadership. So it's not that suddenly completely new parties came in power, or completely new people with completely new priorities. It's the same people, but they suddenly changed priorities in there. Plus, I find personally that, of course, you can have the political intervention. I mean, that's where politics are for. But at times, it's also the question how you do it. Certain decisions you must take tomorrow, because otherwise they're going to have a very lot of negative consequences immediately. Let's take the tariffs from the US and that discussion. Yes, I can understand. But other measures that are supposed to start and kick in 10 years from now, you can still adopt and change next year without throwing the baby away with the bathwater, so to speak. So in that sense, the moment you go to proposal, and the moment it can become politically sensitive, the more that happens and the less technocratic it becomes, I think the more of these kind of mishaps and follow-ups you will see then also in Parliament and Council. A lot of people are complaining about the quality of preparation.
Thank you very much for that. I've got another question from Ebhard, which is it fair to say the Commission is actually quite reactionary to what happens in the world outside the Belemont versus taking initiative itself, in which many in Brussels and elsewhere would believe?
You want me to kick off?
Yes, please, Aaron. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So from my personal perspective, so I spent many years doing air pollution or fisheries. All legislation is a response to what is already happening, particularly by member states, and also the marketplace. And this is not particular to the EU, but it's probably for all governments is it's playing catch up. Usually, if you look at, I was the desk officer for the WE directive back in 2002, and 5 countries who had already had the scheme up and running. So it was just harmonizing legislation. So yeah, it's by its nature, there's a reluctance to do mass legislation for the hell of it, which is probably a good thing.
Excellent. Erik?
I would say that there's, at this moment, at least in how I perceive it, how I feel it, is less agenda setting. It's definitely more reacting to noises or the real concerns. Some people would say with the combustion engine, it was a noise. Other people would say it's a real concern. I mean, it depends on where your interests are, so to speak, in this case, and I can fully understand that. But if I simply compare it to, and I'm going a bit further back, of course, creating the internal market, for example, there was a very different dynamic. It was really going forward under a clear vision of what Europe can provide. At this moment, you have a lot of legislation in place, a lot of policies in place. So there's not too much greenfield development, so to speak, anymore. Which means you become automatically a bit more reactionary, because you're going to see, like, what do we have in place? How does it work? Can we keep this, or do we need change? But I do feel that this moment, even in the setting where you need to improve and upgrade your entire EU acquis, I do feel that there's not so much as before, not so much like proactive approach of the European Commission at this moment. But again, at the same time, there's one thing I need to give away, and I really also say, if I would be working at SecGen right now, close to the Commission President, you probably go a bit crazy with all the different kind of changes and in the world that are going on all the time. But that should not impact the Commission as an entire organization as such, because you're not talking about 50 people that run the legislative agenda for the EU. You're talking about tens of thousands of people doing that and doing that together.
Excellent, thank you, Erik. I've got a couple of the questions which I'll pose to both of you. The first one is: do the better regulation guidelines and toolbox have to be updated to enable swifter decision making? We've been talking a lot about swift decision making, rapid reaction. So actually, do the guidelines and the toolbox need to match that?
Shall I start?
Yeah, if Erik starts first, and then we'll come to Aaron.
Yeah, I think that links very nicely back to the first question about the dynamics. And practically, the Commission has always been saying, and they were correct about that, OECD confirmed it as well, and many others, they were like state of the art in the world, not just in Europe, but in the world, on how to structure their own internal decision making to develop laws and policies and sub-legal acts. In there have been, or there are still a lot of possibilities to speed things up, to skip, and even if you simply have the right commissioner saying yes to it, you can void all requirements. So in that sense, I think you could also, under the current rules as they are, you can draft legislation today and adopt it at the next commissioner's meeting, as long as there is a real political support for that speed and that urgency. I mean, there's nothing stopping the Commission from that. But I think we need to keep in mind that urgency is not a standard file, so to speak, a standard working mode for an administration. If you have 100 pieces of law per year, if 1 or 2 are an emergency, that would already be a lot. I think we shouldn't over-interpret, so to speak, the current situation. In 1 year, you might have a lot of issues you want to deal with, but you should go back to normal again in the end. And I think also about the debate on better regulation, I saw the Swedish contribution, for example, and they say, like, come on, emergencies are a few a year at best, so to speak. It should not be your default way of working as such. Aaron, to you.
So first of all, there have been some changes, some improvements on competitiveness, new guidelines inserted. Unfortunately, the website isn't particularly clear when those incremental improvements are made operationally. So, but they have been changed. So I think that's helpful. I'm going to sound incredibly dull and technocratic. I think it is useful to have good evidence to make public policy decisions, because otherwise you may make mistakes. And I think one of the challenges, and I apologize, I will be a little provocative now. Most of the submissions in public consultations on Have Your Say are, and I say charitably, pointless because they have no evidence. They are more sort of reading the catechism of a particular faith to a group of atheists or agnostics. It's usually sort of drafted by fellow worshippers in an internal committee room. So there's no evidence, there's no solutions. And I actually think that is probably the root cause of some legislation which has gone through, because, and this is applicable to NGOs and to industry, is the evidence they bring to the table is at best weak and at worst pointless, which I think is a shame. And I have a slightly possessed campaign to try and find the unicorn of a good position paper, which occasionally appears like a miracle, but it's quite rare. So yeah, that's my personal view. It's not my professional view. It's just a personal view.
But I think it's quite a useful one and quite a refreshing one as well. As hopefully the provocation will generate a couple of more questions in the chat. So if
you have good position papers, please let me know.
Yes, I mean Aaron's looking for that unicorn, so if you can help him find it, I'm sure he'll be absolutely delighted. I'm going to come to a question to Erik, and it's about simplification.
Mm-hmm.
So why is simplification so difficult on an EU level? It's been talked about for 2 decades now.
Yes, yes, that's a very nice one, actually. You're correct. I mean, overburdening the economy, administrative burden, too many compliance costs. I started actually working for the European Commission in 2006 to work on that topic for quite a while, nearly 5 years. And there were a lot of proposals coming out to make it simpler. From there, I think I would like to make a step back to what's happening in member states. I think what I'm missing each time in Brussels is what I see on member state level happening when they are able to really look at the legislation and improve implementation by focusing simply on burden reduction efficiency. On EU level, there is, at this moment, again, as well, it's like mudslinging. Whose fault is it? Yeah. You see that in political articles very nicely. The member states blame the Commission. Von der Leyen comes back and said, like, yes, but it's the member states. Then the Council looks at the Parliament, and the Parliament looks at the Council. If we really agree that something is a problem, that discussion does not matter. You should focus on solving the current situation. I think it doesn't. It doesn't really matter which member state you look at. All that have been successful, set politically from left to right. Okay, let's agree on a certain way. Only efficiency. We're not going to reduce any kind of standards, and then from there, well, let's improve. And then Aaron already mentioned the fax. I think it was in Germany that they were joking about it. And digitalization, it takes a lot of time. But if you really want to do this, you should stop mudslinging on Brussels level. And you should actually also stop trying to make everything political. I find it as well, people are trying to artificially increase the stake, so to speak, for these kind of files. I do believe, yes, of course, there is always a bit of interest behind it, but you can also over-dramatize. Not every simplification is a reduction in life quality standards across the EU. I don't believe that. And if it's really the case and politically it is wanted, okay, fine. Put it down properly into the documentation, analyze really how it would look like then, and then let the normal political process run. But for issues where you simply say, like, look, how much time does it take to provide this information, or how much time does it take to get a certain permit? Let's just get stuff done, so to speak, instead of discussing endlessly about it. And I think that's the risk that we continue running on Brussels level, that we are discussing too much about the topic while not doing enough about it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Erik. Anything you'd like to add, Aaron, or has Erik pretty much covered this quite?
No, I'll just add one small point. Purely hypothetical. Maybe I know a company who has operations in one country and in Spain. In one country, they have the most mind-numbingly tortuous implementation rules of a piece of EU legislation, which is not in the EU, in the law, EU law. And I was going, do you have the same problems in Spain? They go, of course not. And so, I think the challenge with this narrative of EU rules, why is Spain's economy booming and growing so fast, and others not? Is it perhaps certain cultures have a mundane bureaucracy mindset, which President von der Leyen said in the last meeting of the heads of state? So perhaps countries could look at their own mind-numbing internal rules in French, Dutch, German, whatever you want, and that's just Belgium, and then sort those out, and then Europe would prosper.
Excellent, thank you for that. I think what we'll do is we'll come to the last question now, which we've had sent over to us, which is for both of you. How well do stakeholders use the logic of commission thinking in their advocacy? I will hand over to Aaron. Aaron's laughing, so I'm going to say he's put himself up to answer that one first.
Unfortunately, not. So I can tell you how you can win most of your files is you look at a file from the commission's perspective or a politician's perspective or a government's perspective and read back to them in words and values that they understand. And the commission have been quite helpful. They've written it out in their better regulation guidelines. So, give them what they need. If you don't, which most people don't, you don't get what you want. So my very sophisticated mechanism for having quite a reasonable success rate is give them what they have asked for. That's it.
Thank you.
Saved you a lot of money.
Erik, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, it's a good one. Yes, I can fully subscribe to that. It will save you a lot of money because I've had discussions where people came and said, like, look, the impact assessment has started. We have a public consultation running. We want to have a certain number of issues being brought to the commission. And then the first question is like, what's your evidence? What are you able to collect? What are you able to bring together? And then it was like, probably not on time before the proposal comes out, because those processes, unless you're very, very nimble, so to speak, and you have extreme good databases, it can take you 9 months, a year. If you want to have some scientific research done, it can take you literally 4 or 5 years. And my key message is all the time, when the commission is working on a piece of legislation for 4 or 5 years, why should you only work on it in the last 6 months of that proposal, whether it is with the commission, and then trying to run to the parliament in particular, not too much to the council, and trying to influence that then through amendments, or at least suggestions to amendments. A bit more strategic approach. Sit there already when the commission is thinking about it, potentially even before. And then you can use the better regulation approach, the impact assessment approach, even though it might still become very political. I think politics is still very open to evidence and very reactive to evidence, either to speed things up or potentially as well cool things down. But that takes a more strategic approach, more in line with when the commission starts working, and less with when you get the ping from the monitoring that a certain consultation has started. So be there much earlier. And then you will see as suddenly the issues that would cost you literally hundreds of thousands of euros to fix in the next 3-4 months, suddenly might be a process that takes, 2 years, but it's like, 80K or something like that, much, much less in terms of what it actually would cost you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Erik and Aaron. I think we'll come to the end of the questions now. I think we've gone through quite a lot of information. As Aaron mentions, all of this advice plus more is available in both of the books, which you can purchase via the John Harper Publishing website. Thank you hugely to Erik and Aaron for their time and their presentation and responding to the questions. the next session is going to be on the 18th of March at the same time, which is on engaging with the council. And you can register also via the John Harper Publishing website for that. And we hope to see many of you there with your questions. So thank you very much. Have a lovely day. The recording will be available later via the website as well. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Thank you very much.
Bye.